A senator asked America's Secretary of Defense point blank whether his soldiers would follow the laws of war when dealing with surrendering enemy fighters. He could not answer. He was asked again. He still could not answer. The senator, a combat veteran himself, said those responses prove the man running the Pentagon is not fit for the job. That exchange happened live in the Senate chamber this week. Also, today, the White House told Congress the Iran conflict is officially over, while conditions on the ground suggest otherwise. Russia's military economy is, by most credible accounts, dying from the inside. Cartel money and criminal syndicate cash are flowing through American banks right now, and an American entrepreneur just received a medical bill for nearly $19,000 for an MRI scan that should have cost $350. Stay through the end, because the last story connects everything we think we know about accountability in this country. The White House notified Congress this week that it considers the conflict with Iran to be over, not winding down, over, and yet American troops are still in place. The Iranian government is still in place. No peace agreement has been signed. Tehran proposed new terms for negotiations, and the response from Washington was not yes or let us review. It was essentially, we want more. The president said publicly that he is not satisfied with the result and that he wants a bigger win. What does that actually mean? Think about it for a second. The official position is that the conflict is finished and America won. The operational reality is that nothing has been settled, no ceasefire agreement, no framework document, no named guarantees. The Iranian side has offered to negotiate, and Washington is making maximalist demands in response. That is not the behavior of a country that just won a war. That is the behavior of a country trying to extract maximum concessions while holding the threat of resumed hostilities over the other side. And here is the part that most of the coverage is missing. The Iranian regime is, according to what the Pentagon's chief said in the Senate, factionally divided. Different groups are reportedly approaching Washington directly to make their own side deals. If that is true, it tells us that the country the United States just confronted does not have a unified command structure anymore. My read is that whatever comes next will not look like a clean diplomatic resolution. It will look like a series of competing agreements that none of the parties fully honor. Now, while Washington is declaring victory in one conflict, the underlying war in Europe is generating a very different set of assessments. Some of the most credible American journalists and former intelligence analysts who have recently traveled through both Russia and Ukraine are describing something they were not expecting. In Russia, the mood is described as increasingly grim, not openly defiant, not desperate in a visible way, just heavy. There are reports from multiple credible observers that approval numbers for the Russian leadership are falling, that the military economy is under severe strain, and that there have been no meaningful battlefield advances in months. In elite circles in Moscow, there is apparently real discussion of a scenario that has not been spoken out loud in decades, a collapse of state authority resembling the revolutionary moment of more than a century ago. That is not a fringe assessment. That is what serious people are saying privately. And speaking of assessments that stay private, if this analysis is making you think differently about how these situations develop, a subscription to this channel costs nothing, and it keeps this kind of reporting independent from any advertiser pressure. Now, from Russia, the picture shifts. In Ukraine, by contrast, the reports are of something surprising. Not optimism exactly, but something close to it. A veteran American political journalist, someone who spent decades covering Washington, returned from Kiev recently and described encountering people who feel for the first time that they might actually survive this, that the military trajectory is shifting, that Europe, in the absence of a reliable American security guarantee, has made a firm decision to build its own defense infrastructure without Washington as the primary guarantor. That is a historic shift. Whether it holds is a different question, but the direction is set. You know what the most interesting part of this picture is? A Trump and Putin phone call that lasted well over an hour produced something notable. Washington is now describing Ukraine, in official statements, as the leader of the free world. That phrase carries enormous weight. It did not appear by accident. It appeared because someone in the American foreign policy establishment decided the balance of credibility had shifted far enough to say it out loud. Let me tell you about a different kind of conflict, one that does not appear in any official briefing. According to a detailed investigation reviewed this week, the financial infrastructure of the United States has been functioning as a transit system for criminal money from three distinct networks: Mexican criminal organizations, Chinese criminal syndicates, and individuals connected to foreign governments who moved assets before enforcement took effect. The mechanism is not exotic. It works through correspondent accounts, the standard interbank relationships that allow money to flow across borders. Hundreds of millions of dollars pass through this system annually. The regulators know, the banks know, the incentives to fix it are lower than the incentives to continue. That is the structural problem, and it is not new. But the scale revealed in this investigation is striking, and the implication is straightforward. The institutions that process your paycheck, your savings, your mortgage payment are the same institutions processing criminal funds. Not because they are corrupt, because the system was built in a way that makes the distinction difficult to enforce at scale. But wait, that is not all. Here is where accountability becomes personal. An American entrepreneur recently received a medical bill for nearly $19,000 for an MRI scan. The actual cost of that scan, purchased directly, is somewhere around $350. The difference is not profit in any normal business sense. It is what happens when a system has no price transparency, no competitive pressure, and no mechanism for a patient to compare options before the procedure. Doctors are compensated per procedure, not per outcome. Insurance companies function as intermediaries that increase complexity and extract fees from both sides, and the patient discovers the cost weeks later in the form of a bill that can eliminate a year of savings in a single statement. This is not a fringe case. This is the structure of American healthcare for tens of millions of people. And it is worth asking, honestly, who designed a system that functions this way, and what would it take to change it? My prediction is that this issue will force its way into congressional debate within 2 years. Not because lawmakers suddenly discovered the problem, but because the political cost of ignoring it will finally exceed the lobbying cost of addressing it. That calculation is shifting, and the bills arriving in people's mailboxes are doing the math for them. And now we return to the Senate chamber. The man responsible for running the American military sat before a committee this week. A senator who served as a naval aviator and flew combat missions asked him a direct question. Your forces have publicly stated that enemy combatants will receive no mercy and no quarter. That phrase, in international law, means that surrendering fighters lose their protected status. It is a violation of the agreements the United States has signed as a condition of its role in the international order. Do your forces intend to comply with those agreements? He answered twice. Neither time with yes. The senator said, on the record, that those responses demonstrate the defense chief's fundamental unfitness for the role he holds, not a political attack, a legal one. And here is the part that connects everything else we have covered today. This is the man commanding an active military operation while being unable to affirm in a Senate hearing that his forces will comply with the laws of armed conflict. It raises a question about every other official position this administration takes. If the legal commitments are negotiable, so is everything else. 5 stories. And the thread running through all of them is the same. The gap between what official America tells the public and what is actually happening in the conflict zones, in the hospital billing departments, in the bank back offices, in the Senate chamber, that gap is not closing. It is widening. And the question is not whether you know about it. You do now. The question is what you do with that knowledge. Thank you for watching through to the end. I mean that genuinely. Independent coverage means hours of reading official transcripts, cross-referencing claims across multiple sources in multiple languages, making editorial calls without a corporate editor looking over my shoulder. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, a subscription costs nothing, and it makes a real difference in keeping this channel free of any advertiser or editorial pressure. If you want to go further, a super thanks goes directly into research time and fact-checking. A channel sponsorship does the same, permanently, with no strings attached, political or otherwise. Leave a comment below telling me which of today's 5 stories landed hardest, and where in the world you are watching from. I read every comment in the first 2 days and reply personally to as many as I can manage. Subscribe, because the Senate hearing story is still developing, and I will be following it in the next video. See you in the next one.